Hi, everybody. I'm Lucia, and this is Sam. We're software engineers at StepZen, and we're here to chat with you today and talk about how we got our sticker solution going for the StepZen website.
Yeah, no, super excited to do it. Supposedly my Wi-Fi, there we go, we got the stickers. Supposedly I'm a little in and out, so we'll see how it goes. But Lucia and I will be letting each other know if we have anything spotty as we go along. But I think, Lucia, if you want to kick it off and show them the blog that you wrote.
Yes. So this is the blog post that we wrote about it. We talked about some of the architectural decisions that we made and what was the original problem. So what we wanted to do was to make stickers available to anyone who went to the stickers page and sent a GraphQL query via StepZen. So the problem was, how do we A, store the addresses so I can write out the envelopes and send them to y'all, and B, how do we verify these addresses and make sure that they're sent correctly so that they don't get lost in the mail. So we decided, since we had two different backends going on with the verification and the storing of the addresses, that we would use StepZen as kind of the easiest way to do that. So the front end is in Next.js. So we used a stickers page in the pages directory to spin up the page, and we would have the fetch calls in the API folder, which is all pretty standard Next.js stuff. And then we also set up a StepZen folder, which you'll see more of when Sam shares his screen. But it was pretty standard with, we used Airtable to store the addresses and Lob to verify them. So we had two different schemas set up for that. And then we had a file called index.graphql that told StepZen, basically, this is what the code in index.graphql, but it basically tells StepZen about the presence of Airtable and lob.graphql, as well as a config.yaml that would hold the keys, and config.json that defines the endpoint. And then during the rest of the blog post, I think I will kind of skim over this because we want to go more into the code with our actual IDE. But the rest of the blog post goes into what kinds of custom directives that we used, as well as kinds of the ins and outs of how we designed the schemas. It'll be exciting. We'll get to show you about at rest, which allows you to connect to a REST backend, and show you how we use mutations within a StepZen schema. Do you have anything else to add about the blog post, Sam?
Yeah. No, I will move on to us actually getting into the schemas that we actually show in the blog. Lob is super awesome. I like being able to use the address verification of Lob. I thought it was very seamless. And I found that any issues. I'm gonna pop on over. Okay, let me actually move that out of the way. The postman, we won't be using that. Heading into the code. I'm still running an install here. Yeah, it is going super slow. But if you move on over into here, we kind of see in StepZen right here. Yeah, here, you know what? Let me move to a better location. Lucia, give me 5 seconds. I'm gonna hide myself. Okay.
So we were excited to be able to do this because we're using our own endpoint in our website. And as Anthony points out, some teams don't like the term dog fooding. It's more like eating your own caviar. That sounds grosser to me, Anthony. But it was super exciting, and it really, while I was working through the code with Sam on this one, it caused me to reflect that StepZen really changes the way I think about solving problems in the front end. I think a lot less about filtering code on the client when I'm stepping back and planning things, eating your own Taco Bell. Okay, maybe that's a little better. I think a lot less about filtering and more about what connections I can make with StepZen's custom directives that will make it so that I don't have to end up doing a bunch of logic on the client. Sam, I was just talking about how using StepZen has kind of changed my front-end development style.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think using Next with StepZen has just been really awesome. And the ability to create pages, which is something that we learned a lot here. So you can see my screen, the code correct in here. If
Yes, I
not,
can see
okay,
your
awesome.
code.
Don't want to, cool. And yeah, I think you can hear me better in this. Let me know otherwise.
Yes. Yeah, and you're
Cool.
clearer too.
Oh, thank God. Okay. So really what's going on here is, well, what we're able to do is, and Lucia, you set this up seamlessly, was we have our pages in Next. And essentially you create a page here and it's actually going to be the stickers page. As we identified previous, it's, .com/stickers. So it's as simple as that in Next. And we created it right here. You kind of created that API where we're actually going to be pinging that endpoint to actually check if we're going to be able to, one, be able to actually query in the data and then be able to actually send off that shipment based on the endpoints that we have. And we're able to do that in that stickers page that we'll show a little bit later. But we're doing an Axios call to an actual endpoint that's generated on StepZen, and it makes it a lot easier for us to just do these checkpoints and be able to see how we validate and through the Lob API, and then later on actually add the data into Airtable, which is pretty cool. So getting more into StepZen now and how we can create this endpoint. You come on over into here and we have that lob.graphql, and really all we're doing is, it's a lot of stuff here that we don't really use on the front end, but this is just a way of showing how we can generate an entire type of all the data that's coming back from the lob API in the response. And really what we're looking for is when someone actually does a verification, we're going to be coming back, and I believe in here, we're going to see deliverability right here. So kind of you have that deliverability, and we're going to be looking at it in the type lob US verification, and we'll have the same thing in the international verification. But you're really going to be able to see, yes, it was or was not deliverable by this single point right here. You can get anything else if you want to ever get the ID, the confidence score of how confident they are that this address actually does or does not exist. That can also be added in, but we didn't need to use that for our front end. So the best thing about GraphQL is we are only asking for what we need, right? When it comes to deliverability.
Yeah.
So we're only going to be asking for that. We don't need anything else here. You can get it if you want though. So a lot of the stuff in here is nice haves. If you need them, it's always there. The response is going to be there, but we're really only focusing on getting that deliverability, yes or no, and then making decisions, business decisions based on it. So getting into it, we have the mutations, and I'll close this down so we can see a little bit more, zoom in a bit. So we have US verification, you have the line, city, state, zip code, right? That's what people are giving us, and we're going to check that and see if it actually exists.
Right.
That's
And
based on
to back up a little bit, in GraphQL, mutations are calls that can change data versus calls that read data.
Yeah, slow me down, Lucia. Good. I go too fast. I skip over it all, but it's good to reiterate on these points and write like as simple as just understanding that, hey, these are comments that we have in here. This also just elaborates on understanding this is also technically the REST point that we're hitting. And we're going to be using that REST in order to do this because Lob supports REST APIs. But through StepZen, we're going to be able to ping that endpoint and write a post to it entirely through GraphQL. So getting into it, Lob US verification, we're going to be providing all these arguments. And then by the end of it, we're going to send it in URL code formatted. And then all it's going to do is it's going to append that. So we really didn't even need to add the actual UTM parameters. It's as if it's adding it here, primary line, and just adding that there as a URL encoded. And StepZen supports that when you have an at rest. So you don't even need to include that. It'll automatically throw those in for the URL encoded post that you're going to be making. And if it's there, then it comes back and says deliverability is good, right? So that's what happens there.
Yeah, and at rest is a custom StepZen directive. You can't get anywhere else, and it allows you to avoid writing resolvers to hit REST endpoints from a GraphQL layer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then international, really all we do is add to it is now we're just adding country, right? So more comments on, hey, this is what we do support, this is what we don't. But country is something that we need to add when we want to do international. And we'll show you how we differentiate on which call we want to make on the front end. based on where they're actually inputting this data. So that's really the lob, and then it's fairly simple when we go over to Airtable. There's not much to it. We're really just having a standard Airtable that's going to, in the mutation, write the records and all the fields of the individuals in the create shipment. And this is actually what's going to be coming back in the response that we're going to be seeing on the front end. So
say I'm new to Airtable. Describe it to me. Like, what does it do, and why did we pick it for this project?
Yeah, Airtable is I like to think of it as a really easy to use REST database, right? So it's like a database that you can configure however you want, that behaves very similarly to a REST API. And we'll be showing a little demo of how it kind of looks in Airtable as well. Does that make sense? That's kind of how I look at it, Lucia.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as almost an Excel spreadsheet that you can access by a REST API.
There you go.
Write and read data from.
Yep, like it's essentially a table, right? But databases are tables, and it all goes hand in hand. So I definitely think it's at your own discretion, but all of those make sense. And yeah, that's just the address that we're going to be hitting here. We're going to be providing that base ID from the config.yaml, and then we're going to just be hitting addresses, which is the table inside of our base that we will show shortly. And I think if that is all, one thing I did do is I obviously changed this to be demo stickers. So we'll be running an endpoint called demo stickers for this one. So I'll open this back up and we can press StepZen start. And I had the config.yaml in there.
So this is our demo endpoint versus the endpoint that we use for production.
Yeah, probably going to throw me somewhere. Let's see, localhost. Yep, there we go. Okay, threw me right here as I expected. Cool.
So
if we wanted
just to be clear, that sometimes people are new to StepZen run into a misconception where they believe the localhost 5000 is the StepZen endpoint, but that's actually the endpoint is down to the right on the screen, where you can see it's right there.
Right there as well.
It ends in _GraphQL.
Mm-hmm.
This localhost endpoint is a Graphql that's spun up for you to use with the StepZen endpoint that is also deployed for you.
Yep. And if we were to run something real quick, and I didn't have anything lined up on this one, but if we were to just write dummy data, we'll see. I do have it as strict. It should return an error if I were to go like this, right?
Okay. Would you mind zooming in too?
Yeah. Yep. Here we go. Let's run my mutation. Unprocessable entity. So I think that means that I think it gives a this error when literally it's like, no, this is just complete garbage. You're giving us garbage. If I were to actually give it like a dummy one that is not there, I can spend all day trying to do this, right? But essentially, if I were to give it like a real address, like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, let's go. We'll find out if this is even main, right? I don't know. And then we'll go primary line, I believe would be, so that's city, right? So put that down there. And then we'll go, I don't know, Detroit, state, Michigan, zip code 20187. So let's see what happens. Might work, might not. Undeliverable. Well, good job. There we go. So that one wasn't deliverable. So now we'll be able to show from the front end when someone is trying to punch in data like this, and that's not a real address, we'll be able to get deliverability undeliverable back,
right,
which is what we want to be able to see.
Right. And then for a working one, you could probably try, I don't know, like the White House address or something like that.
Yeah. Give me a dummy address, because I'm not putting my address in here. So give me one that will work. So that's what I actually need. So we'll spin it up. So this is pretty much it. We have create shipment here, right? And it's just going to be adding all the information to our, right over here, our Airtable that we have. So I just have a dummy one in here that actually did work. This was an international one that I tested. And if you come in here, you can see last name, international test. I just did as a dummy, my email. And then if it does succeed, it actually logs it in right here and sends it over. And then when I ping this right here, I think if we were to take a look, I think I might have just added to this one as well. So thank you, Lucia. Yep, 2. So I tested one earlier, and now I just did another one, and we have 2 verifications of US based. So Lobs API, you can't do international testing unless if you have an actual paid account. So in this case, we'll be just doing US verifications for that. And we'll just show the logic on how we wrote it out, but we won't be testing international today.
But we are testing it in real life.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. Does that cover everything before I kind of run this up again?
Yeah. I think so far we've covered how we're making the GraphQL mutations, not queries, in Lob and in Airtable.
Yep. So the next thing that I did was we have an env sample here, right? So we're going to add our key and our URL here, and then it's just going to be able to process those. You can do this securely. We're able to set this up securely to where you don't expose those on the client. It's a little bit of a thing in Next where there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So just make sure you do it the right way. You don't want to expose any keys in your environment variables when you deploy on Next.
Basically, you want the calls to be made under the Pages API folder, and then you want to make sure that the keyword public is not in front of any of your variables, because Next has this really convenient thing where if you add public to any environment variable, then it will expose it for you on the browser, because there's some cases where you might want to do that, but obviously with your API keys, you don't want to. Oh, Anthony asks, what is Lob?
Lob is an address verification API. So it is essentially every time it runs, and I can just, why not just pull up the website, right? So lob.com, automate direct mail and address verification at scale. So they want to do direct mail as well. We don't service that at this point. We just do address verification. So you ping Lob, you go, hey Lob, is this a real address? Lob goes yes, Lob goes no.
Yeah, and that helps us surface that undeliverable error that Sam was showing us earlier, so that you know if you made a typo when you type in your address.
Right. Yeah, and obviously these are customers that you would expect them to want to have Expedia, Booking.com. That makes a lot of sense. They want to be able to make sure that the places that they're sending people exist. So that's definitely exactly along those lines. I like it. It's super easy. The documentation is also great. We won't go through that, but it's really, really handy and really easy to use. And yeah, so I think that answers it, Anthony. Let us know otherwise. But diving back into here, so now that we have the endpoints spun up, I already created those, so I just filled this out, right? And I put it in an env here, which I won't be showing. But you go there, and then I ran yarn install, so I already have that, so my yarn locks in there. And then we just have pretty simple Next startup right here. So Next.js, you come into the pages, and you have your API, as we talked about, and then when you have your app, you have your document, index, and then the stickers page, which is what we're going to be focusing on a lot today. And then if you go into your components, we just have a little bit that we pulled out that we're using in our components folder as well. And I'll just actually pull that up right now, and we'll start diving into it. So I'll go npm run dev, and then we should be able to spin this bad boy up. And I did it here so that we can add, so it doesn't do a bunch of autofill on the form. So I'm going to do it in incognito. Moment of truth when you delete your yarn and you open it, but it looks like it weren't, so we are good. I'll hide this real quick. All right, and then so now that we're here, we have the website, right? So Lucy, if you want to talk a little bit about kind of the styling and the decisions we made on wanting to style this and the direction we took on that.
Right. Yeah, our coworker Michael did a lot of the work on the styling, although Sam did a lot of work with little sticker guys too. But we wanted to make sure that it was clear and that you could enter your address, but at the same time make it clear that once you hit run, you are making a GraphQL query. And it's kind of like a fun design process, because we're also layering a form over the top of that on the front end to get the information from you. And then we're putting the information from the form into the GraphQL query. So this is a little bit of maybe a simplification of what our architecture was really like, but it communicates what is going on at the core of the page.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't put a Graphql on a site that actually will successfully run it and be able to behave like a form submission. We needed to put input fields in there so that they could properly do this and we wanted to make it easier for people to inject it rather than having them to have to actually fill out a Graphql and fill it out on the side. We wanted to make it easy for people. So we built it out this way, which you'll see in the code as to how it's done a little bit. So yeah, I think that's good. All right. Head back over. So I'll close this down. We won't be looking at this for a while. We want to look at the code. So I'm just going to open it up and we'll close these out so we just know what we're looking at. So stickers page. Biggest thing here is we have the metadata of the page layout, right? And then we're going to beautify the code. And then we have Prism. And Prism, we're going to go Prism.js, right? I think this is it. Yeah. So Prism essentially allowed us to build out this code on the front end. It allows code to look, so it doesn't really illustrate it that well based on the front end of their documentation. But we used Prism. Let me see if they have demos anywhere in here. That's simple, dark, funky.
Before we go to the Prism demos, I'm going to interject with one of Anthony's questions, which was, were you worried about the complexity of integrating a form with a GraphQL API and just getting weird errors?
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't really errors that was the issue with building that out. The issues wasn't weird. It was because the moment you send the query, it ran the query. The issue was formatting it and actually making the style look good enough, because the spacing is just so different. We had to actually like blend the two together, and we might as well bounce over Prism. This is a great thing, but it doesn't have visuals for us to kind of show people. Maybe examples here.
As Anthony says, the site is like brutal. My eyes
start
crossing.
But summary, it allowed us to build this out, right? So our entire, and then we beautified the code inside of it. But Prism is this like graphical explorer. It kind of organized that for us, and you'll see it in the code. Yeah. But if you go down, request stickers, got a lot of state going on, but really what's happening here is we are doing international validation. We want to be able to check if it is or if it is not, right? So right away, we're saying true, sure. We could go true or false to start it out because we don't know anything about the user. And then a little other things here is we just needed to make sure that we have requirements in the form. So a lot of these states that we're going to be going through is making sure that we have a state of someone actually filling out the state field, someone actually filling out the country that they're associated with, because we can't run a query until we know all the fields that you have to put in for us to be able to check if your address exists. That's really what's going on here. Other than that, it's just styling that we added in along with it. And yeah, then we have binding. So on action, on submit, on the run action, we're just binding to the event so that we're able to get the forms. This is very standard that you do in a class component of where you want to be able to bind to the event values. So target values of the actual input values. And as you can see.
Setting up this object.
Yeah, so we'll skip this right now because we need to understand the field a little bit more, but those are the queries that we ran. It's a long conditional that we have. We obviously need to make components, so don't make fun of us. We'll be going through this quickly, but if you come all the way down,
individual components to make the form look good.
Yep, but now we're at the render. So if you see here, we're just pulling in all the fields, and I'm actually getting the fields from server side. So we'll go to the bottom there. We'll be able to see the fields coming in. And then we just want to be able to see the keys that are actually going to be mapping up side by side with those fields, which is essentially us just being able to organize these arguments that are going to be coming in first, last, email, all this information. We're just going to be passing that in right here by the keys that we provide. And then if you kind of look into it, we have the connect, and that's just this little guy right here. And then you continue working down from the header right there of the information, and then we get into the form, right? So we have form here, and then you have a demo click, right? Which is the really big thing that we're looking for is OnSubmit. We want to be able to actually get all this data. And then we have the arguments, which is taking those keys, as I mentioned earlier. And then we have a lot of those bindings that are happening in our arguments to make sure that we actually are getting all the information that we need. And then very simple, the fields provided, which are these right down here. So that we get all the data that we want and back that's being provided. And then we just have the button action run. That is the button that runs the form submission on submit, as you can see right here. And that's really it. Yeah, from the render part of it, right? So
yeah, Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
pretty classic OnSubmit. OnSubmit function for React. I almost fell over just now.
There you go.
Should we look at our query in the page here? So what we're doing with
Sure.
Airtable and Lob on the
Absolutely. So yeah, because we could talk about where the data is coming in and everything like that, and we can show all the different points that it's pinging. But really, where we're going to be focusing on this one is being able to show, and I council log that out as well, which can be cleaned. Really, we have, let's move up and get to the actual validation queries, right? So this is the moment of truth right here, to where we have the handle demo click, right? The OnSubmit. So right away, we're going to be like, okay, is any of these fields absent? One of those fields that can be absent is address 2. We don't need your address 2. You don't have an apartment? Great. You live in a house? We don't need it. So all this is a nice little for loop that you go through it on saying, if it's absent, just give it a space so that we can actually provide it as a query argument, or else we're going to get a query back, because with GraphQL, it does require that field. So if we have that field, or if we don't pass that field as an argument, it's going to say you don't have this argument in there. And I think we can actually make that optional, but I wrote it out as absent in this one because Airtable, now I remember, Airtable, they need that in their field. So I just gave it an empty field, so that essentially Airtable doesn't like it and they get angry when you send something and this is null, let's say. So address 2 right here, you can't have null. They won't allow that. They didn't like it. So well, like literally null. So I just give it a space, right? So that's all I wrote there, was that. So we're providing a space for them to be able to see. Yeah, Airtable doesn't like it. They need their post body, right? So when you write it in the post, it can't be empty. It can't have a value, or it has to have a value.
That illustrates how well you have to know APIs to work with them. They all have their idiosyncrasies, right?
Yep. And then this is a little bit more of just cleaning it up and essentially getting it ready to be queried, right? So we could have used like Apollo client, which is a really easy one that allows you to kind of just pass in arguments as you would. We just did straight fetch calls on this one. That's just how we wanted to do it. I think it's because we were already blending so many pieces into this melting pot of a graphical form that we wanted to just not use Apollo off the bat and make sure that we could just support it as a straight fetch call. So, well, we use Axios, but that's how we behaved on this one. And
Axios is just a way to make fetch calls. But I always like the design principle of, if you don't need to add something to make something work and add a layer of complexity to make it work, then just leave it out, which is what we did.
Yep.
Just left it at the level of fetch call.
Yep. So kind of what's going on is, when we have that going, while we have that running, the state of the demo response is just going to be loading, right? So that's what they're going to be seeing in the response while we run this. And we'll show how that happens. And it's essentially just that waiting for us to be able to do these fetch calls, and then we get the data. It's very standard. We just use the state, like Apollo provides that, right, as a part of their demos. And then pretty much wrote the same conditional. So one field can make you write a lot of code. So, address 2 is undefined. Address validity. Okay, so if it's undefined, then we only want address. If it is not, we want to put it in as a string, in order for us to actually be able to provide it correctly for us to do the verification, right? Because that's how they want to do it when you want to have strict addresses. Anthony actually pointed this one out and caught this and said, yeah, like, it doesn't work with my apartment. It says it's not valid. And it was because it was strict. So it really, really wanted you to go address and then immediately comma the second part of your address, apartment 811, apartment B, whatever it may be. So then we have the state international validation. If it's false, very simple, we run the US verification. And how are we determining that? Well, it's an on-click action that we'll maybe go over to in query arguments, but it's essentially saying the moment someone decides to click this country, United States, we're now on the false. It has now been changed to false. And they'll add postal code, and they'll select their state of 1 of 50. They bounce over to Afghanistan. Now they have to put in their state. There's so many states, we couldn't do it for each one. And for each individual country. But we knew for the US, we could probably do that. And then obviously we need to start adding in our zip code. It's getting angry. And then that's all part of the states that we're showing in this form functionality, which is why forms always involve a lot of code.
Right, it's part of the casting.
That makes
here.
Yeah. Should I keep going? Does that make sense? Should I stop and talk about
Yeah, let's
anything
talk
else?
about what this this string validation query here is. What's going on with it?
Yeah, so this is the mutation. So it's as if we were to bounce over to our local host, right? And come in here, it would be writing this to a T. So bounce in there, that's exactly what we're writing. We're writing to that endpoint, StepZen endpoint, this. And obviously we have these as the front end providing the state to check that.
Using those template literals there allows us to insert the values dynamically to the query.
Yep. And then else, and if else, if it's not, then we just do an international verification, and we want it to write out as a validation query there and add country, and then it still follows the same kind of rule of address to. So we don't have to write anything about that, thank God. And then we're just asking for deliverability and country, right? So really don't even need to ask for those. I just wanted to have it in there in case if I ever wanted to use the code, but we're really just going to be checking deliverability. And that's super fast. That's the thing that makes GraphQL so fast, is we're only asking for deliverability. That's all we want to know from this endpoint. Is it deliverable? We don't care where it is. We don't need you to repeat the address to us. We don't need any of that. We just want deliverability. And I was thinking maybe we would do something later on with country, so I do it in there. But we're asking for 2 things, right, instead of 1.
Right. It's all depending on what the developer wants. And all these queries are variables that are passed to our Axios fetch calls in our API. So, but we create them here on the client so that the API knows what the dynamic variables are, can read them.
Yep. And if you were to get into this with the Airtable shipment, that's the args that I was creating up there earlier that I kind of skipped over. I wanted to get to this point to talk about it. I'm using a little bit of regex in here, just moving it around and saying, okay, here's what the data needs to look like for us to be able to pass the arguments and provide those, which is going to, in turn, look exactly like this one, create shipment, right? So it's going to be passing all these in.
I've been pronouncing regex wrong this whole time, probably. I've been saying regex. So
regex? Yeah, I think it's regex.
It's got to go to those discussions like, how do you say SQL, SQL? Squirrel, I don't know.
Yeah, I luckily I never had to say SQL too many times with the work I've done, but I've said it more now than ever. And I say SQL, yeah. But I think I do it interchangeably, like SQL. What's
sometimes
the thing I also do?
It depends on what the prefix is. Sometimes it just sounds more poetic when you say SQL. But.
Yeah. I go between it's something pecan and pecan. I go in between those two. So I flip back and forth. The moment someone asks me, I immediately don't remember. So that's how that always works. Okay, so we're back at this point. We have the args, right? So I just pass those in, and then we have the keys, which came from the initial value that I provided that we talked about that are coming from the same render of these, because we're going to be asking for the same exact thing in response. So then we're able to just be body lob, body Airtable, very simple. Validation, Airtable shipment. Probably could have named this something different to make it just line up better, but that's what we're running. And then the first thing you're gonna do is body lob, and we're gonna post that to that endpoint that we had over here. So we'll actually pop that open and show that we have an endpoint that does exist. And I think it was this one, right? New query.
Yeah.
So you built this out if you want to give it a little bit of talk in your decision on this. It seems like it's a pretty standard practice for Axios and the ability to just write out a request and a response.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was actually looking at it. Maybe I could. I know we have error handling on the client, but I should probably add a little error handling on the Axios end too. So, well, it depends. We should probably talk about that and see where we need it. But yeah, so I made a headers object because it's just easier to see what's going on in the request and response function otherwise. And then we've got our URL, that process.env StepZen API URL was, that's the value that Sam talked about in our hidden env, right? And then we await the Axios request sending the body, which has our API key in it and the content type. And it returns to us the status and the data inside a JSON object. And in Axios, like Anthony said, it's a library like Apollo, but it's not GraphQL specific. I think the first time I came into contact with it might have been with Python. So yeah, it's just like it's agnostic to a lot of different languages, but super handy.
Just
shortens up your logic for making fetch calls.
That's all I was gonna say. Bingo. I was gonna say it makes fetching easy. So yeah, that's exactly what's happening there. So when we post it, we're just sending that data as the body lab, so it understands how to take that. Definitely when you're doing this, follow the documentation, because once you start using dependencies, there's a right way to do it, and if you don't do it that way, it's not going to work. So you post to the URL, that's how they want it, and then they want the query to follow. So that's what they're going to do, and then they'll respond with the information that you want. And then all we're going to take it in flux and back is if the state of international validation is false. So if they're from the US, we're going to be looking at the response of lob US verification, right? We probably could have coded this up a little bit better. This is where the areas where I think we can clean it, and I'm embarrassed to show it. But this is kind of how we just wrote it. So if the validation is false and there is no response and it is null in the back, just say, hey, double check your address, right? So essentially that's what we got when we just did all the really crappy stuff that we were expecting. Like I just put in a bunch of dummy stuff. This is how we validate for that. And we say, no, that was unprocessable. And we're just giving them things saying like, check it again. Like we are not even getting undeliverable. That is so out there that we have no idea what's going on. That's pretty much what Lob is saying. So makes sense from that perspective, I think, right, Lucia? And then we just obviously add that response to the demo response, and then you'll see that after the loading is done, right, as we saw earlier. Yeah, and then keep going in. I guess we're rolling. So if deliverability, as we talked about, the only field we want is deliverable, awesome. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do our second post. We're now gonna send all that information to our Airtable, and we're gonna do the exact same thing. And we won't go over to the other one because it's pretty much the same Axios that's going on and sending in a very similar fashion. And then the response, we're gonna want that data, and then data, we're just gonna put it in as the response, and then the state of the demo response is the data, and then it's going to show it in our response, and then it's going to look really cool, and you're going to be like, oh, awesome, I just created a shipment in their Airtable. And then if it doesn't work, we're just going to, I think it was the if here is deliverable, else, then else, if it didn't work, but we did get data back saying undeliverable, for example, then we just put that up there, and it says undeliverable, and you get the response exactly as we get it from the API. And yeah, then we do pretty much the same thing with international verification. Like I said, we can clean this code up most certainly, and kind of probably just put in variables here so that we don't have to write this in duplication. But that is really what's going on there as well. And then it delivers the data, right? Yeah. And I won't say like what we do for input change, but every single time someone's changing inputs, right here, we're essentially capturing the name and value and making sure that we validate it, right? So just making sure that we have validation going on, and then we just write a nice little switch there and make sure that we have validation for all the form inputs. And then same thing for consent. Yeah. Yeah,
it's pretty standard next form stuff, but if you have a question about it, we'd love to take it.
Yeah, feel free to ask deeper questions on those. We'll skip over them for now because forms are always just something that it's never going to be the cleanest because you usually have such a unique use case example like we do here that you're just going to have to write it out as such. But these are those binds that we have going on, and they're passing into our query arguments that we have over here. And then we just have a lot of different inputs that we're going to have to account for, and we write them out as such and then deliver and make sure that everything lines up. And I think without further ado, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one question that Anthony had that I think it might be fun to talk about at this point in the live stream is, how would you go about building this without StepZen? Which gave me pause, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would be writing a lot more.
Yeah, like if you think what, how many lines do we have here? We were able to write this entire page, and you think 474, that's crazy. Like, well, that's actually not that crazy, especially that we can clean more code up because we have, if we didn't do international and US, and we just did US for say, or just did international, we wouldn't have to write all these if else conditionals that we have all over the place. And this would have been the very, very little amount of code that you would have written. And it still can be, right? If we just cleaned it up and made it as clean as we can with those two. But to do it with REST, I mean, Lucia, you can take the floor on that one.
Or even just GraphQL and no StepZen, I think we would end up writing a lot of resolvers in our schemas, right? In order to be able to consume data from REST APIs.
Yeah. I mean, just think about
whole other step.
Yeah. You would essentially be writing out lob resolvers, and I can only imagine how difficult it would be to write out resolvers to send all of the individual fields that you would have in there, and be able to write out customization of like how I wrote it here. I decided to write it on the front end, but just thinking about a resolver where you have address to, right? The ability to combine those or to not combine those. I'm curious how a resolver would have to handle that as well. Even though we handle it from the front end, maybe it could do that on that side and clean up maybe the code there. But with the cleanliness of being able to have the data exactly as you would want to deliver it to Lob as they ask for it, you can't get really better than this many lines in order to do an entire verification.
Right, and a lot of those are conscientious documentation there.
Yeah, and if you had to do at rest with this, just think about how you would inject the state to this and be able to actually have to write that out, and then be able to somehow put that into your Axios code and have Axios then contrarily have to write that out, and then you would have a very, very large file going on over here to where now you have a very, very cumbersome file of all these different states that you may be writing out with the queries that you're going to be providing with at rest. And so I find the ability to just have mutations so similar. We don't have to constantly be changing the state of all these different inputs that we want to have when we want to flip from Lob to Airtable. It was very seamless to do with GraphQL. Having to do that with REST and how different those would be. Yeah. The good thing is that Airtable is very customizable, so you can make it as similar to Lob as you need. But regardless, if you had a Airtable that was not able to be changed, there were reasons, business decisions as to why you couldn't change it. We would be able to handle a lot of that on the StepZen side as well.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've used Axios and REST kind of directly with each other, but what you'd end up doing is you'd be making those Axios calls to REST endpoints, and then that would end up shoving a bunch of the logic into your client side, which would be like, I can imagine when I did a few similar projects to this, and I think I had like triple the amount of code in my client file. So
yeah, and I mean, yeah, you think about that, and then you have to also think about the fact that when you're making that Axios call and you have the REST being pulled in, you have now two different REST calls that are going to provide the entire response. So for this example specifically, when you want to get the response over here, you'd have to write out filters so you don't get the entire response of the result from both of them. You have to write out filters for that. And we're going to provide everyone just what they want right here. First, to receive news, they get it all. And that's exactly what they're going to be expecting. And instead of some long convoluted response where I don't even know what Airtable would also want to send, we can look, but it would be a lot more, I imagine.
Yeah.
So hope that answers. We really went on that one. So is it good? Show my stuff? Yeah, well, show my stuff. All right. So we're going to go to the address of, you sent it to me in Slack. Do you want to send it again? Here, you know what? I'll just bounce over real quick. And I will grab it. Hold on.
Yeah, I can send it to you via maybe the comments too.
That's good. I got it right here. So there we go. Okay, I'll start sharing again. Ugh. Can't do that when you're on an individual screen. Let's see. Okay, so we have Avenue. And then I don't think we have anything going on. What's NW right there? Washington.
Good question. I don't think that's a first or last name. I think that's
no. Yeah, I have put it
Avenue Northwest or something. Let's leave it in the first box and see if that works.
Okay, I'll just put that in as Avenue, and then I should definitely put that in as address 2 for sure. I think. Okay. I think that makes sense. If not, then we'll be able to show both, right? So Washington, DC. Okay. I like how we had to pick the one state that is technically a city. So we'll add a little challenge to it. 20550 city, and then we have state. Well, Washington, D.C. Is it D.C.
Yeah, what do
Washington?
you do? Like
There we
Delaware?
go.
Oh, the District of Columbia. Cool.
So city is going to be Washington, D.C. Okay, so everything checks the boxes here, right? And then let's go, let's go John Doe, right? Presidente. Awesome. And then we'll go, I don't know, John. Presidente. Here, I'll go dot, just in case that throws an error, at example.com. All right. Don't spend time thinking about that. So here we go. Yeah,
Should
sure.
we remove the comma from address 2?
Ah, yeah. Thank you. Perfect. I think we're good. Unless you see something else.
Maybe the extra dot at the end of W2. I don't know what that's doing there. I think I just put that in as a typo. Okay, let's try it.
Okay.
See if it's invalid, then that's good too, because that it means we've got something. This might come on.
Hey, there we go. So it worked.
Yeah.
So we got the response.
Yeah.
So
now
it is
Joe Biden's
valid.
gonna be like, they don't know my name.
Yeah, true. I should have written that in. John Doe. I even wrote the J.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so cool. We got the data. We got the create shipment, create time, address. Everything comes back. We all know how this works. We get the exact response with, there's the unique thing, the ID.
Mm-hmm.
You created it. It means it successfully came back, and we got the ID in the response. I firmly think that that is where you were able to say, oh, okay, I know that something was actually created, and these people didn't just, well, I guess we could have just generated a random ID and tricked you into thinking it, but we didn't. That's actually an ID that was created, and we can prove it by going over to Airtable right now. So, all right, let me stop sharing and then just share at the right time with that one. Go real quick. Boom, and we're in. Okay, John Doe Presidente. John is in. Successfully came in. This was our test environment that we had, Northwest, Washington, D.C., state, D.C., 20500. And then if you bounce in, if we were to refresh this, hopefully that bounces up, 138.
Anthony says it's a UUID that you can verify, so it's basically an NFT.
Yeah, you technically have an NFT to your stickers. Think about that. No, we don't have one. We should do that as a third API, right? That'd be pretty cool. Pretty good. Okay, so that's pretty much it. There's nothing to it. I think if maybe we were to try to trick this thing and put in some other numbers and get something really wrong.
That should be invalid.
Washington, DCA. Maybe that stands for something. I don't know what I'm standing for right now.
It's an alternate.
Ah, see, okay, so I'm not even allowing it. So that's good. But I think if you go like that, and then let's just make it totally wrong. DC, let's try it. Get an error. Ah, there we go. That's the error. So then we never hit Airtable on that one. That's what was really cool about that. And I do give the footnotes here if anyone ever wanted to go to Lob and find out why they are getting an error. That's actually just a code that everyone uses throughout. I think it's like the U.S. Postal Service standards, and they have messages that mean something right there. We want to be able to transcribe those and be able to deliver that here, but that's still something to be determined. But as you can see, undeliverable, and that means Lob stopped the action and did not carry on to Airtable and actually submit the individual. If we were to come over, we would not see that update here, right? So we don't see the person come in. Mm-hmm. Nobody was added, but if we come over here, it ran because we still pinged it one time. Even though it failed, right? Lob had to check that for us. So we get that one ping. So that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, it was super fun doing this with Sam. We had a lot of fun figuring out how to use StepZen at our website, dog fooding, or as Anthony says, eating your own Taco Bell. But yeah, it was a fun project to do.
It was good. I did it. I was able to present it to everyone in this very dim room that made me feel very like, I wish I had better lighting here, but it was very, very fun to do. Yeah. We had a good time making it, and it's really cool to also see people get excited about getting stickers from us, right? Like we've been getting people that are really interested, and the fact that we're out there, being able.
They're there.
That's awesome. They look so good together too. That's what's really exciting too. Like they blend well. I have to go and get my stickers. I still have I think they're just waiting in my mailbox, so I need to go get those.
Yes, maybe, or maybe yeah. Hopefully, I like put a good return address on the envelope. But
yeah.
Cool.
Anything else?
I did not catch any other questions, so I think we are going to sign off. Thanks for hanging, guys.